Hey. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Nightshift with Andrea Up Late. Happy Tuesday. We are doing a fun little ladies' night. So for all of you that might be new to the show, this is a true crime podcast that generally focuses on unsolveds, but that is not always the case. So we had a 3-part series, the past 3 shows on the Grant Solomon case. Again, it's the Grant Solomon case. I highly encourage you guys to go back and listen to those 3. If nothing else, at least the last one. But all 3 would do you a great service and do a great service to the cause. That is a case that is not an unsolved case. I continue to call it an unresolved case because it's never been investigated as a murder. And I think that collectively, anyone who hears it agrees that it needs to be. So go back and take a look at those. Otherwise, we're going to move forward, and I'm going to have my buddy, my gal, Beth. Let me get her on stage here. Hey, Beth.
Hello. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Excited to be here tonight. These are always
Thank
fun.
you. I'm glad to have you. Yeah, guys. So we do kind of like what we've been calling Ladies' Night every, I don't know, what would you say, maybe a couple of months or so. Yeah. And when we do, the show changes a little bit in the sense that I don't have my typical co-host, BC Sanders. I have Beth, who is Beth LaMontagne from the Bar is Open with Beth and Greg podcast and the Castro Files podcast that they also have. We will touch base and talk about all of those at the end of this show. But when we do a ladies' night, usually, it's a solved case or kind of a little bit more of a wild case, an out there case. I hate to say that it's lighter. This is not a lighter topic by all means, but we're not talking about something that we're, anticipating being resolved. So in that sense, it's lighter, I guess we should say. But how's it going in Tejas, Beth?
It's good. It is humid. Oh my gosh, it's like 98% humidity. I guess it's just 2% away from raining, but it's good.
Yeah.
We had yesterday was the eclipse. Did you guys get to see any of the eclipse?
Yeah, so a little bit actually. We sat at the beach for a little while, and I had not gotten the glasses or done the thing, and so I was spoiled a few years ago. And what was it? 2017 was the last one, and at that time I was in Tennessee, so I happened to be like right in that path of totality.
That's what we were.
Yeah, so to the point that I keep telling the story, but at the time I had chickens, and like it got dark enough that they, stopped moving, and like the rooster was crowing, and everybody was confused for a few seconds, So that was a lot of fun. So this time I guess I wasn't anticipating too much because we over here on the East Coast were not anywhere in that path. But we did, in saying that to you, the sky didn't really darken where we were at the beach, but a couple had been sitting beside us and they were leaving and they had been watching. And so they handed us their glasses. So we were able to catch some of it that way. What about you guys?
So we did have totality. We had probably about 3 to 4 minutes. It was just in South Texas. It was very cloudy. So we got like the intermittent view. So we saw bits and pieces of all of it, not the whole thing, but we didn't need the glasses, which was kind of cool because it was so overcast that it didn't make it super bright. Cool. But it got dark over here. Like people's automatic lights on their porches started going on.
Yeah.
It got really dark. It was kind of cool.
Yeah, when you can see it in that way, like I understood it with the last one. Like I said, I understood the big deal of it when I saw it that way because it did. Or I'd run inside to grab something for the kids, or and coming right back outside, all of a sudden it's so much darker, and it is wild when that occurs. But
we were outside with all our neighbors, so it was fun. And I was like, we're a part of history because this isn't going to happen again for like another, I think
20 years. I think
no, the next one, like full totality, like this one is like 40 or 50 years or something like that. And I was I'm going to be like. In my 90s, I'm not going to care. I'm going to be like,
you might care a lot. You don't know.
Maybe. But it was cool. It was fun.
Well, awesome. Well, yeah, that was a good time. But so you guys in the chats, again, I like to preface every show with this. This is a podcast, but it is also a YouTube channel. So we air live every Tuesday at 8/7 Central or approximately so. And then you can watch that on the Andrea Up Late channel on YouTube. And then you can listen wherever you stream your podcast. So iTunes, Spotify, whatever. I will ask you guys if you don't mind, and I hate it and it's obnoxious, but hit the likes and subscribes and reviews, right? I don't really care. You don't have to write anything very nice. Just like if you write words on the reviews, evidently that's supposed to be a good thing. I don't know. But we're going to get started now. And I bring to you a case actually out of your area, your neck of the woods, Beth. This case took place back in the late 80s. And it teeters between Texas and Mexico. And there's going to be a strong United States thread in it that got American politicians even and law enforcement involved. And it has to do with some things that were happening in Mexico at the time, right there on the border that went back and forth. We've talked before about cases in the 80s. We've talked about like the push for the war on drugs. And we've talked about the satanic panic of the 80s, right? So this actually encompasses all of that. In fact, this case is kind of, a few people messaged me today when they saw the stories about it, but it's kind of like if you took, think Jim Jones. Okay. So think like cult leader, Manson, the Manson family. So the cult leader mixed with the murder, maybe a little Escobar with the drug trade. So if you put kind of all of that together, sprinkle a little voodoo, if you will, in there, and we are going to have tonight's show, which a term has been coined for it, called NARCOSATANISm. One of the podcasts I listened to about it, there's a podcast called The Prosecutors, which has a couple of prosecuting attorneys who now have a podcast, as it sounds like. I will occasionally listen to them. I enjoy hearing them. They're pretty succinct, but they were saying, is this even, do you think this is a real term, or is it a term that we've kind of coined based on what surrounds these events? Either way, I think that it describes it perfectly. So we will get started with that.
The 80s were my jam. I was like 10 years old in 1980. So I was heavy.
You would have been,
what was it? The Moms Against Drugs, or what was it?
Yeah.
There was a slogan. Yeah. And then also my dad was.
There was DARE. I think, MAD was the Moms Against Drunk Driving, but DARE is the one you're thinking of.
DARE. And then my dad was also a DEA agent in the 80s. So interesting from both aspects for me.
Well, I guarantee you this is a case he would have been,
I'm sure,
absolutely aware of. Excuse me, I've got a dry throat. This is also like the pollen has finally gone away here, but it's like left its mark. It's scarred everyone's lungs, I think, by now.
That's what's happening here too, so totally get it. So if you hear me all of a sudden hacking up a lung, you know why.
Yeah. Man. Well, then you're going to be right on par age-wise with one of our victims here in the story that hailed from Texas. So that'll be interesting when we talk about the timeline and kind of what was going on there. And I'll pick your brain on what you were doing at that time. But we're going to get started talking a little bit about this college student in Texas first. I'm going to give you a blip of his history a little bit, and then we're going to wrap it back around to the big stuff and then come back to him toward the end. But so Mark James Kilroy was born on March 5th of 1968. His parents were James or Jim Kilroy, who was a chemical engineer, and his mom was a paramedic named Helen. So he was born in Chicago. They eventually moved to Texas not long after Mark was born. So he grew up in Santa Fe, just outside of Houston. He was there for about 15 years. He has a brother, good family. They were devout Catholics, I believe. They went to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church there in Hitchcock, Texas. So Mark excelled, they will say, academically and athletically. He was a very good student. And it came to him naturally, and athletically, he played baseball, basketball, and golf with a lot of his friends at school. So that's a little bit about him. He did eventually transfer to the University of Texas there in Austin, and he was going to be a pre-med student. So he started there at UT as pre-med. And so he was definitely well on his way. He had quite a path ahead of him. So let's put him back in the back of your brain for a minute, put him in a little box back there, and we're going to come back to him in a moment. But we're also going to talk about someone who was born just 4 years prior to him, and they came up with very different they have different upbringing. So they were born just within 4 years of each other, not too far from each other on either side of the border there in Texas and Mexico, but very, very different in terms of their early lives. So we're going to talk about Adolfo Costanzo. Okay, so he was born in Miami to a lady named Delia Gonzalez. And so Delia was actually a Cuban immigrant. He was born in 1962. She was 15 at the time of his birth, okay? So Delia moved to San Juan after her first husband died, and she got remarried. So Adolfo Costanzo, you'll hear me refer to him as either, was baptized Catholic at the time, and then he accompanied his mom on trips to Haiti to learn about voodoo. So she must have been doing okay for herself. I don't know what tickets looked like airline tickets. That was the first thing that came to mind. If you're going from Puerto Rico to Haiti, I don't know what that looked like in the 80s, but either way, that's what she was doing. I'm like on the edge here. So they, like I said, went back and forth to Haiti to learn about voodoo. So this is when he was a young child. Okay. So his family returned to Miami in 1972. So he was only 10 years old by this point. And his stepfather dies soon after this. Evidently, he leaves the family with some money when he passes away. So now mom's got a little bit more money. And he grows up a little bit more. Now he's a teenager. And he becomes apprenticed to a local sorcerer, if you will. This is when he starts in with a new religion called Palo Mayombe. Okay, Palo Mayombe. Now, listen, I am going to touch on that religion or spirituality, or some would say cult, if you will. You can find gobs and gobs and gobs of information on this online. So I'm not even going to pretend to be any kind of an expert on this and what all it entails. And there is a lot. So I'm really going to just kind of scratch the surface on what that looks like. But it has everything to do with our case tonight. So he starts in this Palo Mayombe. This is something that kind of involves a little bit of animal sacrifice. Remember, though, as a young boy, he was going to learn the trade of voodoo with his mother in Haiti. Okay, so now his mom is getting remarried. Okay, again, so now he has a new stepfather. This new stepfather is now involved in both that religion and drug dealing, the drug trade, if you will. So Costanzo and his mom actually were arrested here and there numerous times as he was growing up for theft, vandalism, etc. He did graduate high school. He got kicked out of a couple of prep schools after that. So as an adult, he then moves to Mexico City. When he moves to Mexico City, he meets these men, Martin Quintana, Jorge Montes, and Omar Area. So these guys are actually running a business and making a good bit of money where they cast spells to bring good luck to people. Okay. So people are paying them to essentially have spells of good luck put on them. And here they would sacrifice small animals, but all the way up to like goats, snakes, zebras, and even lion cubs. So what would happen, right? So what would happen is if you are the client, it depends on how much good luck you want and how deeply your pockets are lined. Correct.
Wow.
So I think like the lion cubs would be, I've heard different quotes, so I don't want to quote the money. It was a lot of money. You're thousands and thousands of dollars. So it just depends on how much luck you think you need. And that's the animal that you're going to get. So most of his clients, however, had no trouble with this because they were wealthy. They were drug dealers. So at the beginning, they start to describing them as drug dealers. You're actually starting to dabble in cartels at this point. So they're not all just your run-of-the-mill dealers. Some of them were hitmen, some of these customers, and they actually were said to have enjoyed this because of the violence of his display of sacrifice. Wow. So there was kind of a bit of a penchant for this. Like they enjoyed what they were seeing. So he starts to attract other members of Mexican society at this point. And so this does start to include some high-ranking corrupt policemen who introduced him to the cartels more deeply at this point. I think we all know that lines have over the years gotten fairly blurred when it comes to law enforcement and citizens and cartels and you name it. When it comes to south of the border, we've heard the stories, we've read the stuff. I think that not everyone is corrupt, obviously, but I think that these kinds of things, particularly at this time, were running a lot more rampant.
Help me, or I'm going to take it out on your family.
So. Well, correct, precisely. So Costanzo starts to raid graveyards because now he's escalating a little bit, and I'm going to use the term escalating for a reason. Ultimately, we're going to discuss what we consider it to be, but at the end of the day, is this a cult? Is that what this really is? Is this a religion? What is it we're looking at? But he's going to start escalating and kind of raid and rob from graveyards to attain human bones now, outside of just having these animal sacrifices.
That's crazy.
So he, this is not the first case I think that I've covered that has to do with raiding for bones in the graveyards. So a little bit on that religion that I just told you about, the Palo Mayombe. So, and just forgive any terrible way that I'm saying things that are incorrect. So this was what's considered like an Afro-Caribbean religion. It has its roots in Cuba, but then we do know that there's like a thick African root in there as well during the late 19th or early 20th century. So that's kind of when it kind of got cultivated and formed into more of a religion. So they say that they do teach about the existence of a deity, but really the religion is not based on kind of your afterlife. It's not based off of what's going to happen to you when you die. So we know that in multiple religions, regardless of how you practice them, what parts of the world practice them, what the actual teachings are, oftentimes it points towards something that's going to happen at the end to you, or what you want to happen to you at the end.
Even if it's something.
Correct. Even if it's a whole new life, whatever it is. But this doesn't really do that too much. This focuses a little bit more about the spirits of the dead, like currently speaking, than what's going to happen to you once you are dead, if you will. So the practitioners are expected to interact and receive messages from the dead and then influence the will of the dead for their own personal benefit. So ultimately, if I were to just in very layman's terms dumb it down, it's all about luck. Like it comes down to like your protection and your good luck is kind of what this, while you are here on earth, what this comes down to. So it gets individualized. The rules are not set in stone on the teachings of it. So that allows people to kind of change it at will. So the way, if you were a practitioner in this, you and I might do it very differently. So something that's very important is something called the Nganga. So it's Nganga. So everything I hear, this is how people are saying it. I hope it's close to correct. So when I say that, picture a cauldron, okay? But this is much more than if you picture a witch's cauldron, right? Like anything from your fairy tales or from your whatever. This is much more of like a vessel used in this religion. So the key role in this religion is that Nganga. So in Central Africa, it's referred to like not an object, but a man who oversaw the religious rituals. And guys, I know this is this might be a little dry at first, but just bear with me because we're going to get to the case and this stuff is highly important here in a moment. And you'll understand what I'm talking about when I get there. So it's usually either a clay pot, maybe a gourd, an iron pot, or a cauldron, etc. It's usually pretty big. It's pretty heavy. They're all unique physically. They all have their own name. And some will say they're either male or female, depending on whose they are. So they keep it in what they consider a domestic sanctum. So just picture any shrine someone would have. They have the same reverence for this and like where they place it in or outside of the home. So it could be inside in a certain room. It could be outside in a backyard, in a shed, etc. So when you practice this or Santeria, so I am not versed in this stuff. I am not, I don't know a lot about this kind of thing. It is very interesting to me, but I can tell you that my knowledge of Santeria stopped at the song by Sublime before before digging into this.
Head. That's so funny.
Yeah, before digging into this show. So I've learned more. It's not just lyrics in the song. So if you practice either Palo or Santeria, you're going to typically keep those vessels apart from each other in separate different rooms. So like if you practice both versions of that religion, you're not going to keep that nganga, that cauldron, with the other one. They're all separate. Okay, y'all know I've got all my notes now because that's how I do things here. Nothing digital in this world. Not at my house. So keep in mind, like I said, there's really no central authority that's in control of this religion. So like I said a moment ago, this is what can change things drastically. And in fact, I would say it can cause people to use it, as an excuse for things they're doing. Because you can kind of write your own rules
to what you need.
You can mold it to what you need. Precisely. So people are going to interpret the religion a bit differently when that's the case. So the contents, and then we're going to get back to the people, but the contents that Nganga are pretty important. They're called as the fundamentals, and they are supposed to be what contributes to its power. Okay. So this isn't like broth and sticks and leaves. It can be those things, but it's going to be a lot more things as well. So they are going to have the sticks. In fact, Palo means stick. So it's going to have sticks. I think 28 of them is like the number that you're supposed to have. And they are going to be selected from a specific species of tree, depending on what you need. So the sticks evidently are believed to embody the properties and the powers of the trees from what they came. So then you're going to get soil, potentially from different locations for different purposes. It could even be from like a graveyard or a hospital or a prison. So don't think just your backyard. They're getting very specific, samples of soil. So you can have water from different sources, rivers, wells, the sea, etc. Stones, feathers, shells, plants, gemstones, coins, you name it, razor blades, padlocks, horseshoes. So you're going to have a mix of metal, and I think the metal indicates war, if I'm not mistaken. I read that at some point. But the harder the objects are to obtain, the more significant that they're regarded in this cauldron.
Makes sense.
Right. So keep in mind, though, on top of those things, you're often going to have blood, the organs of whatever was sacrificed. So then that means that these are often going to come with decomposition. So you're going to have maggots. You're going to have all kinds of things. This isn't a cauldron over a fire. In fact, it's not to be over a fire. That's kind of the opposite of what you might picture. So it's going to be in soil or on stone. So it's not a bubbling soup or, mixture like that, if you will. So it's going to start to get pretty rancid, and pretty gross. The smell's going to be fester.
Decompose, yeah.
Yeah.
It can be like your trash can after a bag of chicken.
Yes. Remind me to tell you a story about a deep freeze I had one time that was full of like deer meat and everything else in my garage in Tennessee. And it was plugged into an outlet with, the GFCI button that if you punch it, and it was August, I believe, in Tennessee. And little did I know a box or something had popped that GFCI, rendering the outlet useless. So it was not plugged in, but it was sealed shut.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Oh, long story short, it was so bad. The content.
Just throw out the whole thing.
Well, a neighbor came down to help me. We sent our children to the other neighbor's house. She and I we wrapped sweaters and things around or sweatshirts around our face, everything we could for fabric, started to try to pull out the no longer frozen. It had gone everywhere in there. It was no longer the color of blood. Things were terrible. It was so bad that actually I just said, forget it. We threw it all back in there. I plugged it back in, turned on the GFCI, let it refreeze, and then called the truck that comes from the city to take stuff. So at least it refroze. But yeah.
Oh man.
Either way, I feel like the Nganga is probably starting to smell like that.
Yeah,
yes.
A lot like that, I would imagine.
Oh my goodness.
Can you imagine? And if people had this in their house, ew.
Right?
I mean,
Right.
I guess.
In this instance, I think it was not inside, but you're right. I mean, it could have been in some specified room for some people, or is for some people. Oh,
Better have some plugins.
let's hope they hang out with more horseshoes and metal instead of the sacrificial cubs.
Right.
So that's a tiny bit, like I said, a teeny tiny bit. It just gives you a little bit of an idea of the religion and of that practice and how some things are kind of carried out. But meanwhile, Adolfo Costanzo was growing in power now in both this religion and then in the cartels. Now, I don't have pictures for you tonight. I'll put them on Instagram, but I'm not particularly fond, but people will talk about his good looks. And they say this because they say that he had a lot of charisma. He had a lot of confidence. He had good looks, and all of these things together would make him wonderful for, persuading people, but also we talk about cults, right? Yeah, exactly, precisely. The cult leader. So people were drawn to him. So he began to believe that his magic, much of which is what he took from that Paulo Mayambi, was responsible for the success of the cartels. And he demanded to become a full business partner with one of the most powerful families that he knew, the Calzadas. Now, keep in mind, he was studying voodoo and different sorts of these types of things since he was a young boy with his mother. She prided him in being psychic when he was young. She told him that he was. In fact, there was something that he said when he was young along the lines of, they go back now to say that he was referencing the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. So that when that happened, we talk on the show often about confirmation bias, but when they happen, they say, oh, that's what he said was going to happen. See, he is psychic. But also you can say a lot of broad stroke things and then later kind of dial it in, right? So I'm not so sure how specific his statement was on that. But he now kind of has this ego. His mom has inflated it, called him psychic this whole time, said he has these extra powers, helped him study, in extra ways for this. So now as an adult, he's in with these higher ranking officials. He's in with these cartels, and he kind of thinks he can do what he wants. And he thinks that he has the magic of this religion behind him. His stepfather once, when he was young, actually told him, this is part of his indoctrination as well, that with this religion, essentially, you can let the non-believers, so if they did not follow Paulo Mayambi, you could let them just die with their drug use, meaning the cartels, and you can profit off of it. So he actually used this religion as what he considered magic to then boost his business prospects in the cartels.
Interesting.
Okay. So he wants to become, like I said, a full-time business partner with this like super powerful family there in the cartels, the Calzadas. But they rejected his demand. So when this happened, 7 of their family members disappear.
Oh, geez.
Eventually, their bodies turn up later with fingers, toes, ears, brains. One case, a spine was missing. You guys, this is not a rated G show today. So Costanzo then makes friends with a new cartel, the Hernandez brothers. So now he's kind of getting in good with the Hernandez brothers. They're starting to kind of form their business, like alternating the religion and the cartel work. Okay. So then he takes up with a young woman named Sarah Aldrete. This chick. So listen, she was actually born in Matamoros, but she attended high school in Brownsville, Texas. So she still lives south of the border, but she was able to get a resident alien status so she could attend Texas Southmost College. Okay. So she was known as a really good student. She's 6'1", very, very athletic. She also was very pretty, very smart. She was a cheerleader. She wanted to study physical education and transfer to a university to get a teaching degree in physical education. So like I said, she was known for her personality and good looks. We will later find out that he wasn't a dummy. This was prescribed, right? Like he picks her because he knows now they've got the male portion and the female portion. There are parts of the religion that will say that as well. And essentially it's to gain the followers. So now it's not just him and his drug guy runners, right? Now he's got this influential, charismatic, smart, athletic woman that can also help him. So he starts to befriend her and gets her in with him and his business dealings. So, excuse me. So Costanzo made Sarah high priestess of the cult. So she had a very high ranking, if you will, within their cult. He made, she was second in command of the entire organization, and he directed her to supervise his followers while he was busy shipping marijuana over the border to the U.S. So in 1988, he moved to Rancho Santa Elena. It was like a house out in the desert somewhere. That's when he starts to carry out some more sadistic ritual murders. Again, I'm going to say he's escalating. Things are starting to escalate with his behavior and with the severity of what he's doing. Sometimes these murders would be, keep in mind, they're calling them sacrifices, okay? Would be strangers, sometimes rival drug dealers. He used the ranch to store huge shipments of cocaine and marijuana. In fact, one time, one of the victims was one of his own because they had a strict no drug use policy. It was only to conduct business with. And they found out that one of his cartel members were using. And so he gets gone too as a human sacrifice, if you will.
Oh, wow.
So let's get on back to that University of Texas student, Mark Kilroy, that we began the show talking about. So on March 10th of 1989, what were you doing in March of 89, Beth?
I was a freshman in college.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Were you partying it up?
No, not yet, because I was at a community college, so still living at home. That happened a year later when I went off to Texas A&M.
I was going to say, and your dad was in the DEA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never got real crazy. I'm not gonna lie. I got crazy, just not drug crazy.
I got you. And not just yet.
Yeah.
So in March of 89, Mark Kilroy had a childhood friend he'd known forever, Bradley Moore. Excuse me. So Bradley Moore had just finished his exams a little bit early at Texas A&M. So he was headed to Austin to pick Mark up, okay? So both of them were then headed to Santa Fe to pick up their two other buddies. You guys, it's spring break. It's 89, spring break. They're ready to have a good time. So they're going to pick up Bill Huddleston and Brent Martin and head to South Padre. How did you know? So I read something recently that, is this right? That around like 50,000 students would descend to South Padre at spring break around that time. Now, is it still a hot place for spring break?
It's not as, I haven't been like in March or April. Like the last time I went was like a year ago for Memorial Day, and it was pretty poppin'.
Okay.
But back in the 80s, that was like the destination for almost all of Texas. Okay. Even I think some people like from, Oklahoma and places like that would even come into town because it wasn't that far of a drive. And I went once, early 90s, because my parents wouldn't let me. Again, I wasn't allowed to go, right? Because my brothers went and always got in trouble. So my parents were like, no, you're not allowed to go. And so I finally went one time when I finally had moved off to college, and it was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
So I think that the United States, I think that we could agree, was kind of split in that sense. So being on the East Coast, so I grew up in Tennessee. I know people a bit farther east would maybe go to like Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, but a lot of people I knew in South and Central area there in the Southeast would go to Panama City. So that was the same, like you're going to have MTV there, you're going to have whatever, so I think that South Padre and Panama City were two biggies there. Mm-hmm. So that's where they were heading. So they were headed to South Padre for spring break. So they drive the 9-hour drive from where they hailed, and they get there just before midnight. They check in. They're at the Sheraton Hotel, and they go to the beach the next morning. So now they're on vacation, y'all. They're having a good old time. Teenage boys. Like I said, I believe Mark was 18, so they were young men at this time. So thousands of students, like we said, start to descend upon South Padre Island. It makes a difference when we talk about these numbers because it has to do with the investigation as time goes on here in a moment. So like you've got beer sponsors, there's like entertainment events, concerts, like I said,
Everything.
like MTV, yeah, you name it, surf simulator, like anyway, so opportunities to appear on TV, commercials, etc. So if you can go find some footage. I'm sure that this thing still kind of exists, but there was something different, I think, about the culture around the 80s and 90s when it came to like the spring break destinations and what that looked like,
It was a big party. It wasn't nearly as strict.
Right.
And you could get away with a lot of stuff.
Right. And I think it was also before, not that crime didn't happen, but I think it was before then it got like crazy, but like super creepy crime ridden too.
There also wasn't phones and, social websites that you could go and brag about what you did or, post what you saw somebody do. So it probably was happening, but the world didn't know it was happening yet.
You know what? That's a great point. I think we touch on that kind of thing a lot, and you're exactly right about that. So there they are. They're living it up in South Padre. Mark and his buddy Bradley go on and make a couple of free phone calls to their parents that day. Later on that night, they grab a group of girls that were from Purdue. They party all night till the next day. So then Mark and his friends kind of do the same thing again. So it's Groundhog Day. They wake up, they go to the beach, get some tanning in. Then they go back to the beach bar hotel. They go to the Miss Tan Line contest, which cracks me up reading it. I know, it's so funny. The Miss Tan Line contest. So when that was over that afternoon, Mark goes and grabs a nap. And they're planning a trip to Mexico. Now, this is very different than things would be today, y'all. There was you could just walk across the border, drive across the border. You can go back and forth freely. And that was most of these kids' plan, at least for a day or two when they're in South Padre, to pop down to Mexico. Alcohol laws were a lot less strict. There was a ton of them that would go. There's a ton of bars up and down that would serve the tourists, generally speaking, from the U.S. there. During the spring break week. In fact, it was a big moneymaker for those areas of Mexico. Yeah. So they welcomed it. And again, this was not an anomaly or like a crazy thing for these kids to be doing. It was very much mainstay in that area at that time. So that's their plan. They're going to go down to Mexico. So they leave South Padre Island that night. They stop at Sonic, grab a burger and some dinner. They now meet a group of girls from University of Kansas who are going to be going to Mexico as well. So they're all going to kind of get down there in like a caravan, if you will. So the young women follow them. They're in his buddy Bradley Moore's car, and they go from Port Isabel to Brownsville. And they park their cars there close to what's called the Gateway International Bridge. And that's where you can cross the border. And cross the U.S.-Mexico border there on foot. So they're just going to walk on over. So Mark and his buddies and those girls from University of Kansas, spent most of their night there at a place called Sergeant Pepper's Nightclub. So most of these clubs had American English names there in Mexico because, again, they're catering to these kids coming over. They're making a ton of money this week. So, or over, I guess it's like a 3, 4, 5 week period of all the spring breaks.
The month of March, yeah.
Precisely. So they're there at the Sergeant Pepper's nightclub, hanging out. Then they kind of go their separate ways. They go back to South Padre Island early the next morning, sleep it off, get up, do it all over again. Okay, so on March 13th, they attend another Miss Tan Line contest behind the Sheridan. And early that night, Mark Kilroy meets with one of his former frat brothers. They go to a condo party, and then they start making their way back to Matamoros. This is around 10:30 that night. So they get to the border, they park and cross on foot yet again, just like they had done the night prior. So this night, Matamoros, it says, had approximately 15,000 spring break tourists from the U.S. on the main tourist street, y'all. So this is like,
it was basically Mardi Gras.
One drag. And now, did you ever go, Beth?
I didn't but I had a lot of friends that went.
I'm sure.
And that was the thing. So I actually was born in Brownsville.
Okay.
And had family growing up there most of my life. So we would always, that kind of spring break, that's what we would do. We'd go to Brownsville and do the, like, family wise. So it wasn't crazy.
Gotcha.
We would go to the beach one day and then Mexico one day to go shopping and eating. And it would be, we would leave in the early early evening
before.
just because the kids were going to start rolling in. And my dad was like, nope, it's going to get crazy. We gotta venture home. So it did. It was crazy. I remember growing up and hearing wild stories of like some of my best friends that went, and just the stuff that went on was insane. I mean, it's the shit you see in movies.
Oh my God. I can only imagine. Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was a lot of fun.
I'm sure it was.
I never got to do it. Damn it.
I'd say let's go, right? But I'm not gonna say let's go. I don't have a desire now. No. So like I said, around 15,000 U.S. tourists that were spring break kids from here were down there in Matamoros around this time on that one drag. So excuse me. So they kind of describe it, like she said, like a Mardi Gras, like sidewalk streets, bars are spilling out and over with kids. I'm sure it's just a hot mess. So that's where they are. That's where Mark and his buddies are. So they get there and they decide to go to this bar that has the shortest waiting line. So this is Los Sombreros. So they're there for a while. Then they kind of wander over to what's called, funny enough, the London Pub. Now, the London Pub was always called the London Pub until spring break. And when it was spring break week, they changed it to the Hard Rock Cafe, which is funny. It wasn't actually a Hard Rock, but they changed the name that week. They weren't dumb, to the Hard Rock, and that's where they were at this point in the evening. So this bar was a bit louder, a bit wilder. So they kind of stayed there for a while. And just observe. His friends will say that they were just kind of people watching. People are throwing beer here and there. Like, it's just getting a little crazy. So Mark meets up with a few women there at the bar, and his friends don't see him for a little while. And around 2:00 that morning, his buddy Huddleston said that they should probably go on back to South Padre. So his friends stepped out of the London Pub. They see Mark. Okay, so they see Mark leaning against a car and talking to a woman who had been at the Miss Tan line competition earlier that day. So Mark is wasting no time. Okay, so he's just having a good old time chatting with her. Excuse me. And so they, across the street, evidently it was kind of mass exodus. So a lot of these tourists are leaving. They're all kind of filing into the streets, and it's getting more and more hectic as everyone kind of departs for the night. So his buddy sees him talking to the girl. So then he decides that he has to go to the restroom. Huddleston does. So he's going to pop down an alley and go relieve himself. And so they get separated at this point, and they don't see each other, but they think he comes back. He doesn't see Mark any longer, but he thinks that they've just kind of gotten separated in the shuffle of people as everyone's walking away. So Moore and Martin, Bradley and the other buddy, separate from the group. They walk to Garcia's. When they come back out to say goodbye, they wait for Bill Huddleston to come back. He gets there, and like I said, they no longer see Mark. So they get there, they look around for him. They actually start to search for him for a couple more hours. They don't really want to go back to South Padre till they find their buddy. But finally, they kind of decide everything's closed. The establishments are closing down. It's around 4:30 in the morning. And they just go on and cross the border back, and they think actually maybe he was just having a good time and he was having a great night, and he had disappeared with the Miss Tan line girl.
Yeah.
Right. So they think that he'll probably just show up at the hotel the next day or in the morning. So they kind of get not too worried about it at that time. So when they wake up the next day, though, at the hotel, and they still have no idea where he is, they then call the police, his buddies do, to report him missing. I believe at this time they also went on and called Mark's parents. So at first, it's not that they were laughed off, but the police were like, guys, it's spring break, right? It's been 24 hours. He's 18. I'm sure, he might be passed out on the beach down the street. He's with a girl, right? Yeah. Give it a while. Like, he's fine probably. But they do start. They start to look for him. And it's kind of a missing persons investigation right around that time. But like I said, often students that were reported missing would turn up in the days that followed. So I think just no one was too worried in this moment.
This wasn't unusual yet.
Correct. And so he was one of the 60 people, evidently. So at this point, Mark was one of 60 people who had disappeared in Matamoros in the first 3 months of 1989. But his case starts to draw more attention in the U.S. because his uncle, Ken Kilroy, actually worked at the United States Customs Service in L.A. So his family is pretty well connected. And because of that, we know that that makes wheels turn a little quicker. So the news gets to his uncle, and a police task force actually was created in Brownsville to search for him. So they don't like the idea of the bad publicity there in Matamoros. So the local police try to go on and shift the blame and suggest that probably he disappeared in Brownsville. But his friends were like, no, absolutely not. We last saw him there in Matamoros. So the federal police in Mexico decided to take the case, and they helped the U.S. investigators. So they start to kind of work together and pile on their resources there. So they both, at this point, though, a little bit of time has gone by, and they're starting to suspect foul play when he doesn't come back. It is out of character. Even if he'd have had a rando fun night somewhere, it's out of character that he would have not come back at this point and gotten, yes, exactly, touch base with his friends. So they start to retrace the steps with the friends of exactly where they had been and what they had done. So the Texas officials then go to the consulate in Matamoros to ask them to carry out a search, for someone of his description. So this goes on for a while, and I won't bore you with all the details of the early search, but no one can quite recall what could have happened. They even at some point, I think, hire someone to perform hypnosis on the friends to see if that jogs a memory. And under hypnosis, one of his buddies said that he saw a young Hispanic man wearing a blue plaid shirt with a visible scar across his face talking to Mark before he disappeared. He recalled that the man walked up to Mark and said, "Hey, don't I know you from somewhere?" But Bill Huddleston said that he wasn't sure if Mark responded in this memory or of this under hypnosis. But none of the friends were able to actually precisely recall this stuff. So that was just kind of a random that they had done. But they actually do go on and search the Rio Grande because the Rio Grande River does separate there at the border. And unfortunately, that is a kind of common place to be a dumping site, if you will. They actually do find a body. It's not marked. So all of these things take a little time and resources, away from what they're doing as this goes on. So his parents go on and offer a big reward. They go down to Matamoros. They hand out thousands of flyers. They're meeting with the attorney general, the Texas governor, who was William Clements at the time, senators. They're doing everything they can, using every potential favor they can cash in to talk to these people to try to get these wheels turned. But nothing's really happening. So we get it now finally on March 26th. It's on America's Most Wanted. So this gives some nationwide attention, as you can imagine, in the U.S. in terms of Mark's disappearance. So his parents are back and forth to Santa Fe, Matamoros, Brownsville, all over the place. So that's kind of where that investigation lies at that moment. Now back to our buddies in the cartel. Okay, let's see what they're doing right now. So with that religion that I was talking to you about, they believe fully that they have almost a cloak of invisibility, if you will, like not just protection with these sacrifices that they were conducting. They felt that it would bring good luck to their cartel, good business, protection from enemies, from rival cartels, and protection from law enforcement. They actually would say that they thought it brought invisibility, like almost quite literally invisibility. They really kind of were starting to believe that they could get away with almost anything. They have escalated at this point in their human sacrifices. Now we've gotten past lion cubs at this point. So there was a key break in the case on April 1st. Okay, now it's been a few weeks. The Mexican federales manned a drug interdiction checkpoint. All right. They saw a vehicle run the roadblock without stopping. Like this dude, this is something that when I finish telling this whole story and just go back and think about, I don't know if it's the irony or what of how this all worked, but because they think that they are protected and invisible because of all of these sacrifices, he blows through this this checkpoint with nothing, no stopping.
He just like they just couldn't see him.
They can't see. It's like Harry Potter. He essentially had donned his invisibility cloak and he's through the checkpoint. Unfortunately, it didn't work and they were seen. So the vehicle crossed the international border there from Texas and sped through the Mexican federal highway. So that connects Matamoros and this other neighboring town. Okay. But thankfully, the cops there, the federales, were quick thinking and knew better than to come in sirens and lights ablazing. So they actually keep quiet and dark and just kind of follow this truck and see where it's going. So they follow it in unmarked vehicles. The checkpoint runner then travels out to this Santa Elena ranch. Remember, I told you about the Santa Elena ranch that our buddy Constanzo's has.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the police pull off at a distance. They observe for a while. And about 30 minutes later, the driver of the truck takes off from the ranch and heads back toward the city. They then make their move on the ranch. So they get to the ranch. They perform a quick search. I'm not sure what their laws were back then, or, I think they could get away with doing a lot more of those things without having to go through magistrates and such that we have to kind of go through. So they conduct a search of the ranch and they discover cult paraphernalia, in quotes, is what they called it, cult paraphernalia and marijuana traces. So they determined that the driver of the truck is Serafin Hernandez Garcia. He's the nephew of a local drug lord whose operations were actually based kind of around that ranch area. But they don't arrest him. Okay, they don't arrest him initially. They decide to actually start talking to him and getting more evidence on the suspected criminal activities there at the ranch. And because they realize now this is bigger. This is bigger than just whatever.
Kind of an informant.
Yeah. So we're getting into cartel. We're getting into bigger circles, deeper circles, if you will. So they start to gather more evidence there. They use informants in Matamoros to inquire on, quote, family activities at the ranch house in order to make a series of these arrests. And so they're doing a pretty good job with this. So on April 9th, they return. They have many other policemen with them, and they go on and arrest Hernandez Garcia at this time. Now, his uncle, Elio Hernandez Rivera, a couple of cult members, this guy named David, a Sergio, Domingo, the ranch's caretaker, okay? We're going to talk about that caretaker. So they've got a few of these guys in custody. So they're pretty relaxed while they're in custody, like not frightened at all, not worried that they not only are not going to get hemmed up on drug charges, but what about murder? Right. Because they're protected. So, we can argue whether this is a true belief in a religion, a little bit of ego, or delusion. I mean, take it for what you will, but they fully feel protected by this.
They think they're untouchable. And I agree with all that. Plus, I think they probably thought they had connections in the police department that would help them get it covered. You know what I mean? Like,
normally I would say yes. In this case, I don't even think they thought that far. I truly think that they believed that these sacrifices, because the more they did, that is a fire alarm. Uh-oh. All is well. There is no fire. There's always random. Something. It was, and it scared me.
It's in the middle of a show.
And it scared me plumb out of my chair. That scared me to death. Oh my gosh. All right. All is well. So yeah, I think that they truly believed
they were just untouchable.
They were untouchable.
And only because of magic and not because of power.
I mean, I think that they let the power get to them, but I think that they fully believed these sacrifices were, I don't know, but it's wild. So again, he ran the checkpoint. I'm just going back to that every time because it kind of cracks me up if it were a funnier case. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that, and they're not concerned. They're all in custody and they're like, whatevs.
Yeah.
Whatevs.
It's all good.
I'm not going to be in any danger.
And they're not like, well, clearly you saw me because we're sitting here. So maybe it doesn't work as well as we thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh gosh. So like I said, so that was on April 9th. So they're in custody, they're kind of chilling, and they start asking them these questions. They just start interviewing them. Well, the rancher's caretaker actually identifies Mark Kilroy, the college student, through a photograph. And he says that, yeah, I've seen him here at the ranch. Yeah. He said, I've seen him here at the ranch. He said, Literally, it was quote, yeah, I saw him. And he pointed at a shack at the back of the ranch. Okay. So the police now interview Hernandez Garcia separately, and he confesses that several people, including Mark Kilroy, had been killed over the course of several months there at that ranch. Again, nonplussed. He is not worried. He's not even necessarily arrogant, just
it's like a side conversation.
Yeah, just straightforward, straight up. Yeah, I mean, him and a few others. Yep. What you want?
Yeah, they were murdered.
They were murdered. They're over here. They're over there. He points. He starts saying like 2 over here, 3, 1. So he said that the slayings had been ordered by Adolfo Constanzo, a cult leader. So at this point, he's not believed. Adolfo is not believed to have been present when Mark was kidnapped or any of these things, right? So he's kind of the big boy now. So these are his, they're the ones that, they're his minions, his dirty workers. They're doing all his calling. So he said that Adolfo is the one who ordered this. He said that he practiced a ritual form of human sacrifice in the belief that it provided supernatural protection for the drug gang. That Adolfo believed that by sacrificing his victims, those doing the sacrifice were ensured strength, abundance, and immunity from law enforcement and injury. From law enforcement and injury.
So yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So Hernandez Garcia says that he was ordered by Adolfo to find a white, in fact, his word was Anglo male, to sacrifice. Let me tell you why that is. Because they had sacrificed multiple humans at this point. I'm using the word sacrifice very, very lightly. And they believed this was ever changing. This is kind of one of those a toddler's making the rules to a game. So they change them depending on what they need. So they change, and they believe that in the cult, they will start to say that they believe that if it can't just be the sacrifice any longer, it has to be a sacrifice that comes along with pain. So it's not like they can just
that's horrible.
Yes, it is. But they believe that the more pain, the more power in the sacrifice and the more protection they get. But remember, his stepfather told him when he was a child that the non-believers, right, can die with their drug use and you can make a profit off of it. And it just gets gross. And so they believe that. Well, what had started to happen was not that the people that they were killing weren't in pain or weren't showing signs of pain, but a lot of these guys were like other cartel guys and things like that. So not that they didn't have pain, obviously, but these are guys who have probably inflicted a lot of pain on other people. They kind of know the game. So they're not going to give it up that easily or give up that look or that horror quite as easily, maybe. So they actually kind of wanted like a weakling, if you will. What's his name?
Are you talking about from like a sacrifice perspective or somebody doing the sacrificing?
No, from the one being sacrificed. Okay. So evidently Adolfo considered like a white male weaker. He wanted an Anglo because he thought he'd be weaker and experience more pain. Therefore, it would be a stronger sacrifice. So that's why he had met. So the whole reason Mark Kilroy was taken was specifically because he was a white guy. And they thought that would make him weak. So according to, this is where it gets a little gross, guys, but according to this Serafin Hernandez Garcia, he says that he and other members of the gang had kind of mingled here and there with some of the spring break students on the night of March 14th. And when they saw Mark Kilroy in the street near his friends, one of the men lured him close to the truck. He approached the vehicle, which this actually kind of falls in line with what the friend said under hypnosis, by the way, interestingly enough. But he gets him to the vehicle. They actually have to wrestle him to the truck. So Mark, per their account, fought back quite a lot.
Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. He fought back quite a lot. They try to wrestle him. They get him in the truck. They get him in there, but one of the guys has to stop and kind of catch his breath. And then Mark's able to break loose at that point, which to me is a bit more heartbreaking. It's like he got away for a moment and ran. Right. But just before he got to the border, he was intercepted by another vehicle driven by the gangster's allies.
Yeah. That's sad.
It's really tough. Yeah, I hated that whole part of it. So they take him prisoner
because he probably was so terrified and like could see that line. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
Authorities, at least, you know, that he could be like, "Help! I'm in danger."
Well, and that's why I spoke on the volume early, right? The volume of people. There were so many people that may not be like something that someone sees, you know, running down the street. You're not really going to bat an eye at a lot. And by now it's like 2:30 in the morning. Probably everybody's about half lit. Like, you know what I mean? So super, super terrible. So they get him now prisoner at gunpoint. They subdue him, handcuff him, put him in the back of the car. So they drive him through the streets, get to that ranch house. They leave him inside the car overnight. So shortly after dawn, the ranch's caretaker goes and actually sees Mark. Remember, he said, "Oh yeah, I recognize him. I saw him at the ranch." So he sees him. He feeds him bread, eggs, and water. About 12 hours after he was kidnapped, Constanzo is a part of it, right? He ordered it to happen, so now he's going to show his face. Constanzo comes to see him with his men. They wrap up his face and his mouth with duct tape. They take him to a storage cabin. His hands are still tied behind his back. And throughout the entire night, he was tortured. He was raped. It was bad. They did very bad things. And then he was led out to the field where he was to be killed. So to do this, remember, again, they're going to call it a sacrifice. So Constanzo actually used a machete to take off the top of his head so that they could then access his brain. So they boil his brain in that nganga that we talked about, that cauldron, that stinky pot of sacrificial things. And so they're starting the sacrificial process, if you will. So they do go on. It gets a little gruesome here, but this is what they would do with all of their victims. They dismembered his legs above the knees to facilitate the burial. Evidently, that wasn't even part of the ritual process. That was just to make it easier to bury him.
Yeah, smaller hole.
And so a wire was inserted in his spinal column. Okay. All the way down the spinal. After he's dead and not part of the ritual. So listen to when I first heard this, I had I couldn't for the life of me understand. Well, when Hernandez Garcia takes police to the spot where Mark was buried, it was marked by the ends of wire coming out of the dirt. So investigators looked around and they find multiple places in the lawn with this wire coming out of the dirt.
I wonder if that's how they marked where they were at.
That would make a lot of sense. It's actually way worse. So they start to be horrified and realize that likely wherever they see that, there's a body, right? The reason is because in their ritual, the sacrifice, that by doing that, they then bury the body and wait. And as the body decomposes, they then think they can take that wire and pull it out of the ground and have the bones, the vertebrae on a wire to wear as a necklace to give further protection.
Again, back to the human bones.
Yeah, that's back to the bones. Isn't that wild? I've never the wires out of the ground.
That's what and I don't know. I guess it depends on how deep you go in your belief, but like that seems so far fetched. You know what I mean? Like from just a reality perspective, like do we really think that we're invisible?
Look, I'm not going to knock anybody's religion, but when you're using religion to kill somebody, I might knock it. Also, I'm always a bit skeptical of a belief system in which you just make up the rules.
Yes.
So at this point, I'm kind of not really calling it a belief system. You know what I'm saying? Like if you can make up your own rules, then what is it?
Get what they thought was protection, but allowed them to enforce the brutality that they want to enforce because they're psychopaths.
Right. So
in my opinion,
that's exactly what we're going to touch on. So on April 11th, police take them, Hernandez Garcia, those other four guys, and force them they do things differently there. Not always is that a good idea, but sometimes it kind of works, right? So the police take the bad guys, right, and put them at gunpoint and force them to dig up all the bodies. So they spend several hours digging up these graves. They do finally get Mark Kilroy's corpse, and were able to identify him via dental records. So at this point, when it was all done, they had unearthed 15 bodies.
Wow.
Including Mark Kilroy's. They were all males. They had been killed over the period of about 9 months. So
it's crazy that I know it's Mexico, right? So it's not really crazy, but like if something like that, so the smiley face killer, you know, in Austin, that has, I mean, there's bulletins like, hey, be careful when you're walking by yourself. Like you would think that they would be like, oh, you know what, we've had people going missing every few months here. So
well, but see, a lot of the ones he was kind of an outlier because a lot of them were rival drug cartel members. So when I did the case on Willie,
they weren't necessarily tourists,
and not necessarily people that people are reporting missing because of their other nefarious activities. So when I did the case on Willie Picton, the pig farmer killer, he was up in Vancouver, and he would select, these were women who had high risk lifestyles, who lived in an area called, I believe it was Downtown East Side, DTES. I believe that's what it was called. It's comparable, they say, to Skid Row, but way worse. So just think homeless, not all homeless, but sex work, these kinds of things, a lot of drug use, but women who, it's not that they didn't have families that loved them, but they've already been missing. They've already been gone. So people don't know to even
runaways or whatever.
Missing.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where that is. They go on and search the residence. They get, first of all, 3 of the 15 bodies were never identified, which I think is terrible. So they're able to seize a bunch of vehicles. Some, it's funny, they make a note to say some were equipped with telephones, but you got to think that's a big deal. It was the 80s, you know, like these car phones. Yeah. So about 243 pounds of marijuana, bunch of coke, bunch of firearms, submachine guns, etc. They find a human brain, a goat's head, chicken feet, turtle, a horseshoe, coins mixed with animal blood. They don't find signs of cannibalism, they make note of, but okay.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm not sure how that would actually make it worse at this point.
You know, you're not wrong.
I mean, yeah, no. So that's kind of wrapping that portion up. So they do say, like, so the guy, Elio Hernandez Rivera, says that he was actually an ordained executioner. He felt actually kind of proud of this. He had a lot of scars on himself that had been like made from like hot blades. And evidently this was given to selected cult members that had the authority to perform the human sacrifice. On April 15th, Mark Kilroy's parents met with George H.W. Bush and William Bennett, who headed the Office of National Drug Control Policy. So his parents kind of, you know, I think everybody's got to find a cause after something, you know, tragic. And I don't say that lightly, but they've got to figure out, yes, exactly. Yeah. So your brain doesn't go crazy. And so for them, it was the idea of drugs, which again, we were in the war on drug era. We were in all of that. So that was kind of the take they took. They kind of went strong in that sense of things. The bodies were exhumed and taken back where they were supposed to be. Now, who we still don't have, though, you guys, I keep talking about the bad guys that we have in custody. We don't have the big bad guy. We don't have Constanza, right? And we don't have, don't forget, Sarah. The Andretti that's with him, the 6'1" cheerleader, the girl, the Mexican girl who was going to school in Texas, going back and forth in college, very smart, she carried herself well and knew what she was doing and worked with this guy. So, but they're nowhere to be found. Okay, so his fall guys are taking the fall, if you will. So the police actually do kind of almost like a little psychological warfare on this area. So they go back to that ranch house where all these bodies were, where this stuff had happened, and proceed to cleanse it. So they go through the ritualistic process of cleansing, and they knew it would make him crazy because that was the opposite.
They're ruining his work. Yep.
They're ruining all of it. And so they sprayed gasoline around the shack. They set it on fire. They said prayers. They sprinkled the floor with salt. They made a sign of the cross. The Mexican government, so this is how it's worded, offered no official explanation for their actions, but a source close to the investigation stated that the police motives were supernatural in nature. They did say that they knew the shack meant a lot to Constanzo, and burning it would make him go insane. And they say, quote, "We would hit him where it hurts," the police said. The next morning, evidently, Constanzo reportedly went into a rage after the arson was shown on national television. So he sees it burning on TV and loses his mind. They were doing this to flush him out. His whereabouts are unknown at this point. So on April 11th, 1989, the same day the bodies were exhumed, Costanzo fled to a Holiday Inn in Brownsville. So now he goes to Texas. Everybody's just back and forth over the border at this point before he flies then to Mexico City, where he had an apartment. So he had multiple properties. The guy was not short on cash, and he had multiple properties. So he kind of goes all over the place for a while. We have like a lot of information on where they think he is and leads they kind of followed. And I won't get in the weeds with all of that stuff with you guys. But on April 17th, that Serafin Hernandez Rivera Sr. was actually arrested in Houston by the DEA and Texas Department of Public Safety. And they filed charges on importing marijuana, possession, conspiracy, and then they start seizing cash and weapons, anything they can to kind of get these guys in custody before they start trying to dish out the bigger charges. So the
they have a second in command too.
Say what?
They have his second in command now too. So that's probably also a hit to him.
Precisely. And remember the rancher, the one who said, "Oh yeah, I've seen him. He was here." Like, he's dead. I think he's dead. I fed him bread, eggs, and water. That's a weird situation. A lot of people I've read, as I've read about this case, are comparing a lot of the ideology and things to the Manson family. In a lot of the sense that he's trying to provide like a familial environment. They all kind of worship him a little bit as much as the religion they're practicing. You even had like the grounds guy, like the Manson, like the grounds guy who was not directly involved in the things they did, but just kind of let these dudes kind of hang out on the property, So like this guy, I think that everyone, it's a pretty known consensus that I don't think he had any hands-on activity. I'm not even sure how specifically, like how many details he knew of what was happening. I'm sure he knew nothing good was happening.
I mean, I was going to say, you can't find a kid in a car handcuffed that's been there for 12 hours and think, oh, he's just spending the night.
And he also knows who he's dealing with, right? Like, so, I mean, I'm not sure that he can just be like, oh, no, guys, move it along down the road. Let's conduct that operation somewhere else, right?
No nativity with this gentleman. He's just turning a blind eye.
Right. So, So it looks like Serafin Sr. cooperated with the officials and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was released in June of 1990 and returned to Brownsville. Yay. So I'll get right to it. We'll start to wrap it up. But the Mexico City Police Department realized that the Matamoros killings were similar to some murders that were carried out in Mexico City between 1987 and 1989. So they consult local witchcraft practitioners and sorcerers and start to learn. And they hear that Constanza probably was hiding in one of the city's boroughs. So then there's just a lot of information on, again, where they go and what they do to try to find him and get a hold of him. So we know that the police, actually what happened was they went to a location for a different reason on a different lead. But when they get there, gunfire hails back at them and they realize like, oh, maybe there's something here important that I need to check out. Well, it's Constanzo. So he's kind of flipping his lid. He thinks they're there for him. Right then. So he starts opening fire. So when this happens...
So he's a little paranoid at this point. Because if he
I would assume so.
Alone, they would never have even found him.
Well, right. And maybe he's starting to realize that he's not invisible,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure how that happens, but I think that maybe he's not invisible after all. So sorry, I'm getting hot. So he runs out of ammunition. He loses his patience. About 45 minutes to an hour has gone by now. So he thinks he's going to be captured, and he decides to order his other guy, his right-hand man, Leon, to kill him and Quintana Rodriguez. Now, there is like a lover situation going on here. So Quintana Rodriguez, I think that he was one of, Constanzo's lovers. And I think that they kind of intermingled a few of them. They were all somewhat romantically involved. Sarah will say that she was not romantically involved with him at all. So De Leon decides that he would agree to do this, that he would kill those two, but he hesitated a little while. When he hesitated, Constanzo hit him in the face and told him that he was suffering hell if he didn't do as he was commanded. So Constanzo then hugs Quintana Rodriguez, and they get in a closet and shut the door. And when they do, De Leon stood in front of the closet door and opened fire, killed both of them with this machine gun and Uzi, whatever you read it says it is, inside that closet. Okay. So then he starts screaming that, Sarah Aldretti starts screaming that Costanzo is dead. Ultimately, though, keep this in mind, because Costanzo wasn't quite as powerful as he thought, and this is a nice takeaway at least, but De Leon was supposed to be engaged in a suicide pact with him and Quintana. So when he killed them, he was supposed to then turn the gun on himself, and he did not do that. So that's how we have all the information that we have now. So both Sarah Aldretti and De Leon say that Constanzo did most of the killings himself. Sarah denies any participation in the killing. She actually states that she was unaware that the killings occurred at all until she saw the victims on national television. She said she was sorry to hear about Mark Kilroy's murder and that she was not an official member of the cult and was barely going through the initiation. That's not really true. Yeah. Yeah. Deny the polygraph, girl. That is not true.
Let me start reversing out of this.
Yeah, precisely. And so she, as time is going on, she's like, oh, I mean, like,
wasn't that involved.
He was kind of starting to initiate me. I don't really know what's going on. I don't know this business. It's not what I do. Meanwhile, a guy, I think, rebuffed her advances or said something to her that she was offended by, and she brought him back to the place and he was killed. So her job, she was, what's her name? Ghislaine, right? In this sitch, like, she was going to recruit, to get the people that they wanted as sacrifices, and they were utilizing her and her beauty and her stature she was the bait to obtain these people to bring back the victims. So, but now that her boss man's dead, she's like, I don't really know what was going on. It's crazy talk. So that's kind of how that goes. Ultimately, they start getting a lot of people from this, as you can imagine. Like, people kind of start falling like dominoes with all of this. And in August of 1990, De Leon was sentenced to 30 years in prison for killing Costanzo and Quintana. I'm like, that's what he's in prison for?
Right. Like, and it's not even that long.
Well, and it's the two bad guys. I mean, I know you still can kill somebody, but like what about all the other victims?
Exactly. And so in there.
Right. So the ranch caretaker, was accused in court of cover-up, but he was released from prison on December 11th of 1990 and paid a bond of like $500 USD. So we have Sarah Aldretti on May 3rd of 1994, sentenced to 62 years in prison. The cult members, the three, Serafin Jr., Martinez, and Serna Valdez, got 67 years, each.
Wow.
So that's kind of how that went. Now, I will say that, they're referred to as Satanist at this point. And that's why I was using the verbiage I was using earlier that I said we would talk about, because I venture to say serial killers. That's what this is. I I can't get to the point where I believe that they just thought by doing this, their cartel business was going to grow and this was a monetary advantage. Like, you
I think that was
liked
their
what you were
excuse.
doing.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I
that
think
was
a
your
lot of it
excuse.
was their excuse.
We can get away with doing this because we're saying it's for a cause, even though
Yeah.
it's not a right cause, but so this is why we're doing it. We're not really murderers. We're worshipers.
Right. So listen to this. One time, one of the workers, they abduct, this is a terrible, terrible part of the story, but they abduct a 14-year-old boy, do all these terrible things to him, murder him. And it's not until right after the murder, because he had a bag over his head, it's not until right after the murder that one of the cartel guys realizes it was his 14-year-old nephew.
Oh, shit.
And so so, but when he realizes this, I mean, you've got two choices now. I mean, you dig in or you go home, right? Like, what do you do? And he actually, that kind of, broke him, if you will, but it broke him the wrong way, like into the thing.
Deeper versus
he went
getting
deeper.
out kind of thing.
Yeah, he went deeper and was just like full in at that point. So, but we've talked about cults before, or like what drives someone to be in a cult. And I would consider that I would consider you're having to, or BC and I will talk sometimes when it comes to certain cases, it is very rare. Like when you get, like, let's say like the horrible husband and wife couple on board to do bad things to kids or whatever, it's hard to get multiple people, particularly if they're random people. They're not husband and wife. These are random people that come together to unite for a cause like this.
Right. It's a certain type of person. Like there's things that draw them to this. It's like you and I wouldn't, because we are confident. We are, we're involved in society, right? These are people who are loners and have nobody, and this becomes a way for them to kind of get out of that status.
Well, and is it like an acceptance? Everybody needs somebody, that's how BC will talk about gangs. I mean, at what point I think lines get blurred when it talks about like either a gang or a cult or whatever.
There's something that's missing in your life and you think you can get it from this.
And somehow, though, you get these people that, I guess, whether they wanted to kill people or not, they develop a penchant for it. They become like hungry for it, and maybe that's the acceptance portion as well. Like they wanted to be accepted by him.
Well, I think it's a bit of that, and then they're brainwashed to believe based off his, how charismatic he was, and he probably was very confident about his religion and the things that they were doing. So why wouldn't you believe in it? Like why wouldn't you want to be a part of that? What, you'd rather be alone than join us, kind of thing.
Well, and it may be too, now that I'm thinking, I guess out loud, to kind of bouncing it back with you, a little different than when someone joins a cult. They're not necessarily, I mean, sometimes they do, but like the things that these people are doing to other people, obviously, and we're talking like they would skin people alive. Like they're doing really, really bad things. Yeah. And so I think that there's something to be said for, these were already like cartel guys. So they were already participating very likely in violence beyond a gunshot wound or something. You know what I mean? So potentially, likely some torture or some things. Right.
Yeah. And they just took it to the next level for a reason now, though.
Well, and that's why I call it escalating, because he didn't start out. Big Boy didn't start out by killing people. At first, it was like voodoo with his mom. Then that turned into sacrifices with small animals, which I would then almost like transfer over into, we talk about serial killers and we talk about, the torture of animals. So, and in fact, these drug cartels loved it because they said, because of the heinousness, the severity of the torture of these animals, he didn't just kill them and let them bleed out. Like brutality. It was brutal. And so because of that, and that's why I said early on, I feel like he was escalating in behavior because he's becoming a serial killer. Like, I don't want to whitewash it or, gloss it over with, I don't know, Satanist or ritualistic sacrifice. No, he was a serial killer. Now you can call it a cult and you can call it a serial killer cult. I mean, like, but that's what this was.
Right. And they may have worshipped this, I'm going to go back to when you said he practiced voodoo. I don't know if this is actual voodoo, but now like he's turning into a serial killer who can put it to a reason, which makes it even more powerful in his head.
Well, yeah, and then we've got it all like snowballs. I think there's like a synergistic effect with all of it, right? So you've got the cartel, you've got the religion. You can say the religion is bringing you the power and protection. Like it all, turns into the next thing.
Yeah. And BC, I think he said it's a horrible psyops, but it's very effective. I mean, obviously, there's been maybe not to this degree, but there have been cults forever, and sometimes they just want you to come live on their farm and give you all their money and grow their land, and then sometimes they want you to kill people, so.
Well, and then one of the podcasts I listened to that talked about it referred to a couple of things. One of them was Jim Jones, and kind of saying like, well, old boy wasn't quite as good as Jim, right? Like he couldn't convince the guy to kill himself. Right. But another one spoke on, like look at Nazis, look at being able to get that many people under a certain mindset that then involves heinous torture, and then you've got Himmel, who like was a serial killer, but was able to use this job or this ideal to be able to do it, and so, yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, it's like a whole, it's terrifying and fascinating all at the same time, right? Because for somebody to have that power, and I know it's only power for a certain type of person, but there's enough people in the world looking for that acceptance that does give them power, and after listening to this story, I'm very grateful my parents didn't let me go to South Padre.
Right.
Because it seems like, I mean, let's face it, Mexico is 10 times worse now, right? From a perspective of the cartel and drugs and murders and people missing. But, at least in certain areas, there's respect for the tourists because that's their income, right? It sounds like at this point, it had nothing to do with the income coming into Mexico as much as it did, what are they getting out of it for them personally?
Right.
By taking these people. So.
Well, but and that points toward another thing I was reading, and then we can wrap this up, but it points toward the boldness or what they believed in, this protection or this immunity from law enforcement or injury, I believe is how they worded it, because again, it was the war on drugs. It was, you're talking about getting a quote Anglo, this is what he says he wants. So you're getting a white boy from the United States during the war on drugs, specifically for this thing. You were bold, guy, like you were fully confident and you could get what you wanted.
He wasn't going to get busted. He thought he was
for sure.
Yeah.
And then the guy drives through the security checkpoint without his invisibility cloak.
Always one that has to ruin it for everyone.
I know, right? They can't see me. Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can. How have you been, Beth? You been doing good?
Good. Just trying to, busy. There, like you always. There's always something going, right? So we've been having a lot of fun on the Bars Open. And I think I mentioned it before, Peter McGuire and Greg have the Baldy and the Big Guy now, and they're having a blast with it, and so we are trying to also revamp some, there's been a little bit of a low in the Castro Files because it does take, as a lot of homework, because you've got to get the story and the facts and the history, and so it does take a little bit, but trying to revamp some of those up so that we're back to dropping at least one a week. So just trying to stay busy.
Yeah, you guys have got a lot. Why don't you go on though and tell them, Beth, real quick, where they can find you? List all three of those so that so there's no confusion there.
Yeah, so you can find The Bar is Open, Baldy and the Big Guy, and Castro Files anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. We tend to post things out there, kind of like you. After we do the show, if we have pictures, we'll put the pictures out there. So I'll say what you say. If you guys haven't had a chance to join us. We try to have a lot of fun. We try not to get too serious or political. Sometimes it can't be helped, but if you haven't checked us out, check us out and like and subscribe, because like you said, it really does help the cause in the growth.
It does. Yeah. Go over to all three of their stuff, like and subscribe. You can subscribe to their channel. Again, that's The Bar is Open with Beth and Greg. So they do, like you said, the same thing, YouTube and podcast. You can
usually find it. I think on YouTube, you can find all three of them under The Bar is Open. So, that Perfect. One spot will let you hit all three.
And so you can do that, guys. You just hit subscribe again. For any of the shows we talk about, it's free. It doesn't cost a dime to subscribe, to like and rate and review. And there's a reason everybody says that obnoxious spiel, because it's true and it does help. So go give them some love over there for sure. They are a lot of fun. She mentioned it was kind of like lighthearted and fun. It is, and you can always get in the chats. For any of the shows, if you just log in, if you just create a free YouTube account, you can get in the chats and chit chat back and forth with the host. So you can do that with them.
And that's sort of the fun. That's
it is
fun being able to see people's reaction to stuff. So definitely encourage that. Yeah, absolutely. And
do you guys have new merch or anything like that out?
We do. There's a link on the Instagram page that takes you. I'm trying to. It's on the spot. I'm drawing a blank, but we do have merch for the Castro Files and for the Bars Open. We have some great comfy shirts, some koozies, some phone covers. So yeah, check it out. If you
that's
check out
Minor League Studios.
Open, yeah, thank you, Minor League Studios. Thank you, and then you can click on the merchandise. You have stuff on there now too, don't you?
I don't know. I'm so BC does. So I think the Disruptors podcast has some stuff over there. I am so far. I've been telling people since October I'd get a new shirt design out, so I will do it soon. I'm considering one that's maybe you guys let me know what you think, but like the cancel symbol, like the circle with the slash through it, with polygraph, deny the polygraph. Something like that, just like little on the chest. I don't know. It's just some kind of night shift shirt. So we'll get something going. Yeah. I don't know, something.
And it's fun. I mean, it's good quality stuff for a great price, and you're supporting a good cause, right? So
for sure,
check it out. It's a lot of fun stuff.
For sure. Well, Beth, I'm so glad to see you. We got to do it again soon.
I know. We'll do it again. We'll plan something. I'll try to see if I can find a good. Maybe we can share a scary story.
Yes, I know. I promised ghost stories last time, but I didn't deliver. But we will next time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys, thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
It was interesting. I love these stories, so you should see my notes.
I love it. I love that you take notes because you're a girl after my own heart. I love that so much. Same. It's this whole table everywhere around me is just full. But you guys, it was great to see you again, and we will see you guys next week on Night Shift with Andrea up late. Again, you can follow on Instagram at the same handle. You can listen wherever you listen. This will drop in a couple days to iTunes and Spotify and all of that. So until then, we will see y'all next Tuesday.
Bye, guys. Have a great week.
Good night, y'all.